Election night, voting closed at 10. We'll soon have the first results. Tonight, we're in Radlett, and welcome to Question Time. And good evening to you at home, to our audience here who are going to be putting questions to our panel, who, as ever, do not know what those questions are until they hear them. The Conservative Justice Secretary, Chris Grayling, Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, Tristram Hunt, the Liberal Democrat former Home Office Minister, Jeremy Browne, UKIP's Deputy Chairman, Neil Hamilton, the blogger, Jack Monroe, whose book about feeding her family while living on benefits became a bestseller, and the television presenter and property expert, Kirstie Allsopp. Thanks very much. And our first question is from Prisha Jobanputra, please.
Does the increasing support for the UKIP indicate underlying racism?
Increasing support for UKIP, does it indicate underlying racism? Jack Monroe.
Thanks for starting me off with that one. Well, I don't know enough about UKIP to be able to demonise them as an entire party, but the signs are worrying. The signs that so many of their members have come out as racist or homophobic, have come out with large blunders through the press. There was one UKIP candidate who said that gay people shouldn't be allowed to have or adopt children, which stuck in my mind as a gay person with children. I was like, ooh, if they get in, are they going to try and take my kids away? But a lot of, to come back to the question, a lot of UKIP candidates and people who claim to represent UKIP are racist, are loudly racist, and their policies appear to be racist. So I would say that, yes, it hints at underlying racism, but actually plays on people's fears, because no party is going to turn around and say, I'm a racist party. It just talks about, Britain and British jobs and, nationalism and extreme nationalism in a way that actually sells it as quite an attractive proposition for people who don't really know where else to turn.
Tristram Hunt.
I think UKIP and the rise of UKIP and votes for UKIP is about a politics of anger and a politics of alienation. And whether they're racist or not, what we have to do is deal with the issues.
Well, that dodges the question, saying whether they're racist or not, because the question was, does the increasing support indicate underlying racism?
Well, they are guilty of inflammatory, ugly language. But I've met lots of people on the doorstep who will be voting UKIP who are not themselves racists. And that's why their politics speaks to this broader crisis we're seeing, and not just here in the UK. The fringe parties are getting votes right across Europe. And so our solution in the Labour Party is to respond to this on policy terms and politics. In terms of the activism you've seen out on the streets of England today, having conversations with voters. We've got double the number of activists on the streets today.
Yeah, well, we don't want to know about Labour. We don't want to know about Labour. We're talking about UKIP.
I know, and that's why
we'll come to Labour.
We're going to beat them on the policies, because what are they concerned about? It's the cost of living, it's the economy, it's the politics. So whether it's the minimum wage, or whether it's rents, or whether it's 0 hours, that's how you deal with the alienation and the anger. Calling them names doesn't always get you to the right place. Actually, you've got to engage with the politics.
Well, you just said they were inflammatory and ugly, some of the things they said. I don't know whether that counts as calling them names or not.
No, it doesn't. It says that their language is inflammatory and ugly.
Neil Hamilton.
Well, I think it's very dangerous to fling words like racism around in a casual way, because being a racist is a very nasty thing, and in certain circumstances it's against the law. And UKIP is certainly not a racist party. If UKIP is racist, so are the 80% of the British public who agree with UKIP's line on immigration, according to opinion polls. The Labour Party has very, very belatedly apologised publicly for its disastrous error in having an open-door immigration policy in the period when it was in office between 1997 and 2010, when 3.2 million net addition to our population came about because of immigration producing all sorts of strains on public services, health, schools, transport, etc., etc. UKIP is not a cause, but a symptom of these problems. If it hadn't been for the failure of the establishment parties to control immigration into this country in recent decades, then I don't suppose UKIP would have come into existence, because most of the concern that's been voiced during this European elections campaign, something which the Labour Party certainly never wants to talk about, anything to do with Europe.
I'm delighted to talk about Europe.
Well, let me just finish my answer to this question. We'll come on to Europe. We'll come on to Europe, perhaps a bit later. But it's principally the Labour Party's failure after 2004 to impose transitional controls which existed over most of the rest of Europe upon Romania, upon
the
Eastern European...
The issue of racism, Neil, can you address? Not the whole of UKIP's policy.
But the issue is that people confuse being concerned about immigration with being a racist.
Okay.
And that's the main point that I want to make, that you do not have to be a racist to be concerned about immigration.
Do you agree with that?
To a certain extent, yes and no. I
To a certain extent, yes and no.
I don't want to be agreeing with Mr Hamilton, but I think any of the political parties, there's going to be that element of racist element in there. But my point is, the whole point of this race relations and everything, it was messed up in the 1950s after the Second World War when we asked for people to come over and help us. The race relations which those people received was never addressed. We're now living the back of what's happened because of that.
People coming from the Caribbean.
From Asia. They weren't addressed, they weren't integrated properly, and they played on people's fears. So there was going to be groups which were going to be playing off the fears. I personally think I can agree with what a lot of white Britons think they're being alienated because other people are coming and taking their culture. People's culture is very important. As much as I want to respect mine, you've got to respect the people's where you are as well.
The woman in yellow there on the right.
One of the reasons that I think people call UKIP a racist party is because, unlike the mainstream parties, where we hear about all their policies, all we ever hear in conjunction with UKIP is immigration, Britain, not in Europe.
So you blame the way they put themselves forward?
That's all, that's mainly, if not all, they talk about.
All right.
No, that is absolutely not
Neil,
the case.
I'll come back to you.
That may be all that's broadcast or reported, but it's certainly not what we all talk about. If you came to a UKIP meeting, and I've done dozens and dozens of public meetings up and down the country over the last few weeks, you will find that UKIP has a full range of policies, and
What are those policies?
Chris Grayling.
Well, if you'd like to give me the rest of the programme in order to broadcast...
I think not, probably. Chris Grayling.
Yes, I remember Nigel Farage didn't even know what was in the manifesto last time.
No, that is completely untrue.
I think it's really important.
I've got a copy of it here for you to read, if you like.
Well, the last manifesto, he said was 486 pages of
You
rubbish.
didn't know what was in it.
It wasn't. This was the manifesto. The other 400 pages were, in fact, discussion documents that were published at the same time.
Chris Grayling.
I think it's really important that we actually don't conflate a legitimate argument about levels of immigration with a discussion about race. We are a multicultural society. We have been a multicultural society for a long time. The issues around immigration are to do with the ability of the country to absorb people, with the implications for school places, for the health service, for the availability of housing. There is a genuine, legitimate and important debate to have, and from our point of view, it is important to pursue lower levels of immigration because we recognise the practical pressures it places on this country. That is a very different thing to talking about race.
Okay, what about UKIP? We keep the two separate. Because the question, what Prisha asked, was whether UKIP support indicates underlying racism.
Well, the question is about underlying racism. I don't believe fundamentally this is a racist country, though there is racism in this country.
Can I get back to Prisha, who asked the question? What's your view?
There is underlying racism. My kids experience it. I experience it. It's very soft. Unless you're an ethnic in this country, you don't realise. And especially if your colour is different, you don't realise. And it does exist.
Kirstie Allsopp.
I think it does exist. I think you're right. I think that in comparison to other countries, we do reasonably well here. And I think that Brits as a whole we are liberal people. And there was a very, very funny comedy show on Radio 4 where there was a black comedian talking about Brits trying to get it right. And I think a lot of the time, people in this country are sensitive to other people's feelings and cultures, and we try and get it right. And I'm very proud of that. The problem about the UKIP question that you raised, it's not just racism, it's sexism, it's homophobia. I think Chris is right when he says we must not confuse concern about immigration, which I see in my work with people worried about housing a lot, with racism. But at the same time, we have to say it loud and clear. There are supporters of UKIP who are profoundly sexist, racist and homophobic. And that is something we see on an almost daily basis. And there was a UKIP funder who was on Channel 4 News recently, and he sat there and he said openly...
He's not a member of UKIP.
He had given you money, Neil.
Well,
he had given you money, and he said he didn't believe there was such a
The
thing
Conservative
as
Party
rape
doesn't
in
interrogate
marriage.
its donors about its
Don't
views.
take money from people who don't believe
But
there's such a thing as rape in
Kirstie,
marriage.
you're dodging the question, because you're talking about your view of particular people who represent, as you say, UKIP. The question was, does the increasing support, and we know that's running at sort of 25%, does that indicate, when we'll know tonight what it is, does that indicate underlying racism? Are you saying the people who go for UKIP hold the views that you castigate?
I think the people who go for UKIP are turning a blind eye to some of the people who support UKIP. They're turning a blind eye. They're concerned about the things Jack and Chris spoke about, but they're turning a blind eye to certain supporters of UKIP who aren't as one would want them to be.
The person there, you, sir.
I think when the leader of a national party comes out on a national radio station and when describing the difference between Germans living next door and Romanians living next door comes out with the answer, you know what I mean, I think that can represent underlying racism in a party.
You want to come back on this deal? I'll come to you, Jeremy.
The Conservatives in 2005 had their advertising slogan, "Are you thinking what we're thinking?"
And we've also just recently had the vans from the coalition government cruising multicultural parts of London saying, go home if you're illegal here in very inflammatory
And we had nine Labour councillors in
ways.
Harrow recently resigned accusing their own party of institutional racism. So you see there's a lot of it about, isn't there?
Jeremy Browne, do you want to answer the question?
I want to talk about UKIP rather than sort of throw insults at them, because I think on one level there is a perfectly legitimate role for a political party that thinks we should leave the European Union. And actually, the choice that you would have had in the voting today would have been much more limited without UKIP being on the ballot paper. And they are reasonable, I think, to talk about the restrictions or lack of restrictions on freedom of movement within the European Union. Now, I disagree with them, because I think when it comes to globalisation, our best prospects of being successful as a country are to be outward-looking and internationalists. But I think there is a perfectly legitimate opposite view, and that's the view that UKIP put forward. But that is not just what UKIP represent. And I think the political classes, if you like, and the media elite need to understand the state of mind of quite a lot of people, particularly beyond London, who are voting for UKIP. Now, some of them may be racist and sexist. I'm sure some of them are. But I think some of them object to being told the whole time by that elite what they should eat, what they should drink, what they should say, what they should believe in. And I think Nigel Farage, for quite a lot of those people, is just a big sort of two fingers stuck up to what they feel is a sort of hectoring, out-of-touch elite. Now, they may be unreasonable, they may be angry beyond the point that they should be, but I think the politicians in the other parties need to spend a little bit of time reflecting, if there is a protest vote, why people are wanting to protest, and not just bandy all of those people as being racist or whatever it might be. Some of them, I suspect, are, but I think there's an onus on the establishment politicians to also think what we can do to reconnect with people.
Why aren't they coming through? Why doesn't the Liberal Democrat Party appeal to people like that?
Well, I'd like us to. Maybe we'll come to talk about the Lib Dems
well, maybe
as well.
We will, maybe we won't. But what's your answer to the question?
Well, I think all politicians in all parties, or a lot of politicians, are guilty of not having the clarity and the appearance of authenticity that, say, Nigel Farage has, or for that matter, Alex Salmond, or even Boris Johnson. I think with quite a lot of those politicians, you may like them, you may dislike them, but people have a sense with them that they are telling you what they fundamentally believe in. And I think quite a lot of the mainstream Westminster politicians look like they're telling you what you want them to say, and that's not the same as telling you what they want to believe in.
I noticed you didn't mention Nick Clegg in your list of people who speak their mind.
Well, do you want me to enlarge on that? I mean,
no, I just
think
Nick Clegg
has made the most significant decision in my lifetime in British politics, which was to lead my party, which has been in opposition for generations, into government and to contribute to the rebuilding of our country.
Man in spectacles there.
Yeah, I think right now the mainstream politicians are telling telling the nation what they think the nation wants to hear by pandering to the UKIP support that seems to be coming through. If UKIP have succeeded in anything, then to my mind they've succeeded in bringing out the worst in people and their approach to politics.
I don't think you can simply dismiss those people who are going to vote for UKIP as just wrong-headed, misguided, the worst elements in British society.
But it's not
they have genuine grievances about the nature of our economy, how it's delivering for working people, the nature of our politics, and what we have to do as politicians is come up with policy solutions to them, have the conversation with them, engage with them, and not write them off in that way. I don't think that's right.
I'm not saying you write them off, but there seems to be a mood where the panel seem to be suggesting from the mainstream parties that perhaps policies need to change, and that to me says that you lack the courage of conviction to stick with your policies and challenge what UKIP are saying, because it's very, very dangerous.
We challenge what they're saying through attractive and engaging policies.
We've heard from a lot of people. Are there any specifically UKIP supporters in the audience who'd like to speak? You say yes up there.
I get very tired. I heard a lot from the panel and a lot from the audience. But I get very tired as being painted as a member of society who's frustrated, I'm vulnerable, I'm fearful. Trust me, I'm a very well-balanced member of society. Okay? I don't need to be told who I'm voting for, whatever political party it may be wrong. Every single party has issues with some of their members, and I'm not excusing UKIP for those members that are involved in it, because absolutely, I agree with Mr Hammond, racism is totally and utterly wrong. But I get very, very tired of being told that I'm a fearful member of society and I don't quite understand. The problem is that some of the issues that UKIP hit on transpire into local problems. For example, I live in Bishop Stortford. There are people who lived in the town for 20, 30 years who cannot get their children into a particular school. 4 schools in the town. Now, immigration is entirely to blame for that. I'm not saying it is. But it has a net effect on the town. And they're the issues that people want to discuss, engage with in a very, very balanced way.
So you don't want lectures from politicians on what you're thinking and why you're thinking?
No, I don't, because for all the main political parties, none of them come from the moral high ground.
OK.
But that's precisely the point I was making. It's a discussion about practicalities. In terms of immigration, it's about things like school places. Our job over the next 12 months, as we go up to a general election, I think is not to throw mud in all directions. It's actually to earn people's support by setting out a clear agenda.
David Cameron called UKIP's views appalling. I mean, isn't that throwing mud?
Well, Neil Hamilton, last word to you.
UKIP is now regarded, according to David Miliband, as a mainstream political party. And
Ed, would that be, or David?
I was... I was just...
It's a bit sensitive to them getting it wrong.
I mean Mr. Ed, of course. But, millions of people will tonight vote, or have already voted, for UKIP. I think it's the most grotesque libel upon millions and millions of decent working people in this country that they should be derided as homophobes, sexists, racists. The people who are voting for UKIP are doing so because they're worried about the future of their country, they're worried about the pressures on their own lives. Mass immigration of the kind that we've experienced in the last 20 years is wholly unprecedented in the whole of British history. More people came to this country in 2010 alone than in the 900 years between 1066 and 1950. And this has put immense pressure upon jobs. I'm absolutely certain.
That sounds a very dodgy
You'll find it on the Migration Watch website. Well, it's an entirely independent think tank.
I'd like to see the
Sir Andrew Green, who is the chairman of it, is a former ambassador, and he's a man of complete integrity. If you disagree with that figure, you can disprove it as an historian.
I'm just querying it.
But who can deny the problems that have been caused by the scale and speed of unlimited immigration in the last 20 years? It's caused massive wage compression. The GMB union claims that it's reduced wages at the bottom of the income scale by 15%. Okay. So this is not something which is recognised only by supporters of UKIP. It's recognised throughout the political spectrum, except by a lot of the mainstream politicians who are failing to give voice to people
All right.
in their fears
I think
and needs.
Jack Monroe, brief word from you, and then I want to go on to another question.
So you've got your Migration Watch website that counts how many people come into this country. Do you have a facility that counts how many doctors leave this country, how many nurses, how many people with skills and trades? No, you don't.
Hang on.
You can't talk about a net figure when you don't know how many people have left.
All right.
Oh, you can
This is a contentious point, and it's argued over and over again, and I don't want to argue it here, because we've had the question about racism. I want to go on to another question, because I want to get through 3 or 4 tonight if I can. Remember, you can join in this debate. Text or Twitter our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981. The red button will tell you what other people are saying. And we go on to another question. This one from Dave Rawlings, please. Dave Rawlings?
Will the latest rise in house prices leave a generation with no prospect of owning their own home?
The house price rise, much bigger than in London than outside in the United Kingdom, but everywhere. Will it leave a generation with no prospect of owning their own home? You better answer this one, Kirstie.
Thank you.
You know the answer, I expect.
I don't know the answer, and that's the problem. There is not a simple silver bullet which will solve this problem. And politicians that are looking for headlines get it wrong again and again. There are lots of issues. Firstly, we need to build more, but it isn't just about building more. I support right to buy, but we should have built homes as we sold homes. Secondly, we have to look at a whole load of other issues which people never talk about in relation to housing. Many, many more people went to university last year than did 25 years ago. But that means that people are coming into their early 20s with debt, they're coming into work later. We may be living longer, we may have more time at the end of our life, but the period of time in which we can marry and have children is still the same as it was. As a woman, your fertility drops off a cliff age 35. Now, I see so many families in real pain because they have gone to university, they've started work later, the average age of buying a first home has now gone almost over 30. Only 6% of first-time buyers are in their 20s. There are really important issues in society which aren't just related to housing, and we have to address those. We can't just talk about the physicality of houses. Yes, more high streets should have residential property above them. Yes, we should build above all single-storey, out-of-town units. You can make some wonderful housing developments very quickly. There's some fantastic technology coming from Asia where you can build pods and put them on top of single-storey units very quickly.
I don't understand why you can't address housing on its own as an issue, because that's what young people want, is a house for their families and for themselves.
But, David, the evidence is showing that isn't actually what young people want. A lot of people
they don't want houses.
They don't want to settle and get a mortgage and as early as they have previously. Society has changed. And that is part of the problem. It's not simply that houses are very expensive. They are very expensive in the south and the southeast. But the areas all around the country where the prices are not as high as they are here in Radlett, where young people are not engaging with the process. Yeah, they're very high in Radlett.
But people have to lay their heads somewhere at night. Where do they lay it?
Yes, but they're renting. They're not... The thing of wanting to leave school, perhaps get a post-A-level job, stay at home, save up, that has changed.
So there isn't a housing crisis?
Of course there's a housing crisis in the
There is
southeast.
a housing crisis.
There is a housing crisis in the southeast, but the housing crisis is not simply about money, lending and lack of housing. It's about many wider issues.
Tristram Hunt.
We have a national obsession with property going back hundreds and hundreds of years, and Kirstie has added to it very successfully. No, in a good way, Kirstie. And that's not going to change. And owning your own home and wanting to improve your home and wanting to buy a bigger home is a worthy aspiration, and it is proving harder and harder. And there is a demand and supply problem. We've had a government policy which has promoted further demand with the Help to Buy scheme. Hold on.
Are you in favour of Help to Buy?
I'm absolutely in favour of Help to Buy in the first stage, which was particularly on new builds, which made a real influence, and that was very good. I'm not so convinced that you need a government subsidy for £600,000 houses. I don't think that's necessarily the best use of money. But we have a supply problem. We need to build more houses. We need to get local authorities to put pressure on the developers to unlock some of the land. We need these garden cities and new towns. I agree with Kirstie's proposals on densifying development, on building upwards, but we also, I think, need to look after those who do rent and have some proper policies for those who are being absolutely hammered on the rental charges, hammered on the tenancies. And we in the Labour Party have got some, again, substantial policies on that, because, to return to our earlier discussion, that's how you deal with the crisis of politics. You come up with proper policies which can be implemented and can help people deal with the cost of living crisis they face today.
As a homeowner, it's not just about the people who are trying to get on the ladder. If the interest rate rise does come, it's actually going to force people who are already in their homes out of them, because they won't be able to make their mortgage payments, because they're going to be spending so much more money on those properties. And we're ignored. Everyone talks about the people who are trying to buy, but what about the people who've already invested all of their savings, are working day and night to try and make those payments, and they're going to find themselves trying to get a rental because they can't pay for their own home.
But when you took out your mortgage, did you think interest rates would stay at a low level?
I was told when I took out my mortgage that I should get a fixed rate because the rates would go up almost immediately. That was 4 years ago. Thank God I didn't, because I've saved a fortune, but all that money's gone because everything else costs a fortune as well. And if the rate does come in at a higher level, I will lose my house.
Okay, and you, sir, then?
I bought my house 3 years ago on a fixed rate on my own. So I've got another 2 years on my property. Now, I took a fixed rate because if the interest rates did change, like the gentleman's just pointed out, I would be ruined because I have my fixed income on myself. I've got another 2 years. I will probably move and buy a bigger house. My partner's moving in with me. But the luck there is that I've only paid what I could afford to pay. My mortgage is fixed with my salary. Now, it's gone up.
Okay, all right, quickly.
When you move, will you have to pay stamp duty at 3%?
I will, because I'm going to be buying a more expensive home. Yeah.
That is a disgrace. That is one of the first things the government could do to make things
You, sir, in the pink shirt here.
The only way you make a real difference to the housing stock is by building on greenbelt land. And unfortunately, in places like this, the answer from the neighbours is not on my doorstep.
Let him speak, Kirstie. Go on.
The answer from the neighbours is not on my doorstep.
Would you like to see greenbelt land built on?
Not on my doorstep.
Chris Grayling.
Well, the truth is, it's a difficult balance to find. We need to build more houses. There is no question. We have young people who are struggling to get on the housing ladder because not enough houses have been built. So it's absolutely clear that we will have to build more. We're also going to have to be smart and innovative, and Kirstie's absolutely right in some of the things she's proposed. And actually, if you fly over London, you can see scope within the boundaries of London, for example, to build additional houses. The Mayor is setting out plans to try and step up the levels of development within London. At the same time, it's really important that we don't end up destroying the countryside in the southeast, particularly where the pressures are great. And so I think it takes smart decision-making by local authorities. We have given them much greater control over where development goes. I can see spots in my own constituency where development could happen in the future. I can see other places where nobody would want it to happen at all. So I think smart local decision-making, innovative thinking within city areas about how we make better use of the land we've got, doing the kind of things that Kirstie is talking about. But there is no real alternative over the next few years than to build more houses. And some of those need to be affordable houses as well, because we can't just be focused on homeowners. We recognise those who won't be able to.
On the issue of the Green Belt, is your planning minister right to say we shouldn't obsess about landscape? Sometimes buildings are better. All we need to do is build on 2 to 3% of land. We'll have solved the housing problem. He got a lot of stick for saying this, and people assume that he's not as much in love with the green belt as the man in the pink shirt is, or maybe as you are.
Well, I mean, I could wander around my own constituency and find areas of open land where I think most people in the area would say it's possible to develop. We've got half of an old mental hospital site, for example, that is yet to be developed. But equally, there are other parts of my constituency where it would be mad to build houses. It's part of the rural heritage of the area.
Is Nick Bowles right in the way he's putting it?
Well, Nick's expressed his own views about how to do it. I think we have to be careful about how we do it. I think Nick is right to say that we will have to build in some open areas. I also happen to believe we have to be very careful about where we do it and how we do it.
Man in the green tie there, you say.
We can make far better use of what we've got at the moment. We can use our inner cities. I come from Bristol, where 98% of rebuilding is on brownfield. Yeah. We're converting old offices empty office spaces into homes. We need to think about homes, not houses, not means of appreciating value, but somewhere for young people to live. Let's have more rented accommodation and affordable houses as opposed to large developments.
Okay, and the woman at the back there, the woman at the back.
I'd like to agree with Kirstie's point on stamp duty thresholds. I think the government could assist enormously by increasing the thresholds so that people who that tax was never designed to catch are taken out of it.
Can I just respond to that point very quickly? Say, look, I agree that there are a number of areas of taxation where I'd love to see change. The honest truth is right now we're still dealing with a huge public deficit and there are things we can't do right now, but which I'm sure many, many people in my party would love to be able to do in the future.
It's not, Kirstie, it's not about a reduction in tax. If you remove the slabbing at £250,000, you would stop this constipation at that level, which causes enormous distress for a lot of first-time buyers.
The woman on the gangway there.
Instead of putting money in right to buy, the government should have given more money to the housing associations to build affordable houses. And secondly, particularly in areas where there is very high demand from overseas buyers like London, the government should restrict the right for non-residents to buy in those areas. I'm talking about Denmark and Switzerland where that happens.
And a reform we introduced at the end of our period in government was to allow councils to use their rental income to start building again. And I think Kirstie's right that one of the great errors under Right to Buy was not to use that money then to invest in housing stock and build a supply up to it. Of course it was going to run down.
Jack Monroe.
Kirstie said that the housing crisis isn't about money and lending, but my housing crisis is about money and lending. I've saved a quite famous period of unemployment for 18 months, of which I'm not going to go into here. I've been in full-time work for about 10 years, and I don't own a home. I've never been able to own a home, and today I decided to see what, knowing I was coming on here and housing might come up, to try to take out a mortgage with my bank that I've banked with for 10 years. So I logged on and I put in my salary and I put in the average price of a two-bedroom flat in my area, and I got an error message that told me that even at 0% interest I would never pay that mortgage off in my lifetime. And I went, oh, that's a little bit rubbish, because I work hard and I work long hours and I can't afford to buy myself a home. But actually, it's a bit of a Tory obsession with a property-owning democracy. David Cameron talks about a deep natural instinct to own your own home. And I don't have a deep natural instinct to spend 100% of my wages on my mortgage. I just want somewhere to live. And I've lived in rented accommodation, again, for about 10 years, and I agree that people need homes, not necessarily houses. Living on assured short-hold tenancies where you can get booted out at 6 months on a whim and things like that, I think that's the things we also need to be looking at. But we also need to address nearly 2 million people on social housing waiting lists and ask that actually when Thatcher sold off the social housing and ring-fenced that people couldn't buy anymore, why we now have 2 million people on social housing waiting lists waiting for affordable housing.
Well, the answer to the original question is yes, in many cases. I think the social contract between the generations is being broken, and there's a shortage of both social housing and housing to buy, and that is mainly because there's a constant upward pressure on demand. The population is growing strongly. The population's gone up by 4.5 million in the last decade. That's almost the population of Scotland, the UK population has gone up by in the last decade. But also a lot more people are living on their own. 100 years ago, 1 in 25 houses was occupied by a single adult. Now it's 1 in 4. So all of those have a upward pressure. Government can take measures on the margins, on stamp duty, on help to buy. But ultimately, the only way it can be fundamentally addressed is to increase the supply. And that's why if we want to restore that link, if you like, that social contract between the generations, and actually it's not just young people, there's a lot of middle-aged people now who are unable to buy as well and have difficulty because they can't get a mortgage beyond the age of, say, 65. And so if you come into your 40s and you haven't managed to buy at that stage, you might be struggling. If we want to try and do something fundamental about that, ultimately the biggest part of the answer is building more homes.
Okay. Neil Hamilton.
Well, I still live in a house at the age of 65, which is largely owned by the Building Society. And it is true that in Britain, compared with other European countries, there's a much, much higher rate of home ownerships. There is the desire to, as I think David Cameron is quite right, an instinctive desire to people wanting to own their own homes. But it is a question of supply and demand. And Jeremy said a moment ago that the population has increased by 4.5 million in the last 15 or 20 years. Yes, and it's going to increase by another million in the next 5 years, because the Office for National Statistics published the figures today, which showed that net migration into Britain well, listen, you groan, but net migration is an addition to the existing population of 212,000 per annum. That's a city the size of Manchester that we need to build in the course of the next 5 years in order to accommodate that alone. On the other hand, the government has put £375 billion into the economy through quantitative easing, and that is driving prices up. As the employment effects of that stimulus works through, it then finds its way out into other areas, and hence we're in the incipient stages of an asset boom like so many that we've had before. And the gentleman in the front row is absolutely right that the elephant in the room in the property market is what happens when interest rates go up from their record low where they've been resting now for several years. Because when the Bank of England has to raise its interest rates from 0.5% to, say, 1.5%, it's only a 1% increase, but it's an increase of 3 times the existing rate, and that is going to produce massive problems for people of affordability.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to go on because we're over halfway through this edition of Question Time. Question from Shirley Herbert, please. Shirley Herbert.
Is Prince Charles right to compare Putin to Hitler?
And when you say that, are you saying, is it a correct comparison, or is he justified in his position in making it? Or both, maybe?
I'm saying both.
You're saying both?
Yes.
Tristram Hunt.
Well, I think it was a private conversation which was picked up by some creepy Daily Mail journalist hiding behind a sort of pillar. I don't generally believe everything that's written in the Daily Mail, which is a good rule for life. But I do also think we should be careful about the inevitable comparisons with Hitler. Hitler was a man of prodigial world historic evil, and we have this shorthand, whether it was Sadat or Saddam Hussein or Putin, connecting them instinctively to Hitler. But when you look at the militarism, when you look at Putin's aggressive nationalism, when you look at this sort of language of aggrieved patriotism, when you look at the contempt for international bodies, when you look at the annexation of land, there are uncomfortable echoes from the past. And it is also noteworthy that so many fascist and neo-Nazi parties across Europe are supporting Putin. But the difference today is to the 1930s is what we can do about it. And Russia can be addressed in some of its instincts by international economics, because what is happening to the Russian economy is terrifying as a result of these interventions. So we need to keep the diplomatic pressure on. And on the day of the European elections, it is really significant that the way we're going to deal with President Putin, the way we're going to deal with his aggression, is through the European Union, which makes the case for a strong diplomatic lead within Europe, because we can't do it on our own anymore. We need that diplomatic presence through Europe.
And can you answer the other half of Shirley's question? Is it right for the Prince of Wales, now taking on more and more duties that the Queen did, to be on an official visit to Canada and say this, even if he said it in private? There are apparently a lot of journalists around.
I think it was...
Is he right or wrong to make that kind of remark?
I think it was a private conversation with an elderly Canadian lady over a cup of tea, and who knows what context within which it took place. Again, I do not take as sacrosanct the writings of a Daily Mail hackette.
Chris Grayling.
Well, I agree with Tristram. I think it is wrong to report private conversations. We shouldn't end up in detailed discussion about them. We don't know exactly what was said. There's nothing recorded. There's no quotes. It's a hearsay comment. I think people, even members of the royal family, have a right to private views, to private conversations, to have private opinions. Of course, it is not right for a member of a constitutional monarchy to enter into a public debate, but that's not what is suggested to have happened here. I think members of the royal family need to be able to have conversations in private, and I don't think we should get into commenting about them. As regards what's happening in Russia, I think it is disturbing. I think it is wrong. Where I perhaps disagree with Tristram is that we have had for the last 70, 80 years a body that has had a pretty good record in resisting actions at the Russian end which are not appropriate. It's called NATO, and I think NATO, our partnership with the United States of America, the unified Western world, should be willing to make it absolutely clear to the Russians that what is happening is not acceptable, and we should be willing to stand by the Ukrainians who are facing a threat that they do not deserve.
Okay. The man with spectacles there, in the second row from the back.
I think NATO has literally forced Putin to an extent into protecting Russia. Equally, Churchill 80 years ago said that appeasement of Hitler was going to be a terrible thing, and was proved right. Putin is there to establish Russia as the power it was 10, 15 years ago before Glasnost. I think we have to be very, very careful how we react to him. I think he's not 100%, personally. He's a power maniac. He wants Russia to be as Russia was.
Is the comparison with Hitler a fair comparison in your view?
In my view, yes. If we ignore him and hide, as we did 80 years ago, we could have a problem in Europe. There are neo-Nazis.
You, sir, in the second row there.
I think Prince Charles is absolutely right to make statements, private or public, of a political nature on the basis that for years he has been vetoing legislation which hasn't even got to Parliament through spider letters. He is a public figure, he is a political figure, and therefore we have a right as subjects in this royal family democracy to hear what he thinks before he becomes a king, potentially. So in terms of Prince Charles saying it, he definitely should. Is the comparison sound? I think there are lots of similarities between what happened in Nazi Germany and happens today. And Tristram, you're absolutely right. The point is that we can change things now. Things are different. But we have to be firm against Putin on the basis that if you're not firm against fascists, bad things happen.
Neil Hamilton.
I think it's absurd to categorise this as a private conversation, because the heir to the throne having a conversation with somebody he's never met in his life before, although it's a one-to-one conversation, it's not private because he can't control the use which is made of whatever he might have said afterwards. We all know this, we're all in public life, and we've all experienced similar situations in a less public context, perhaps as members of Parliament and so on. And one does have to be careful how one expresses oneself in situations like that. And I think it was actually quite foolish of Prince Charles, if I may say so, without lèse-majesté, to get embroiled in such a discussion in Canada this week, because if it got out, as has happened, it was bound to have diplomatic implications for Britain. He is a constitutional figure, but he's got the right to make his views known, as the gentleman in the second row was saying, within the system, and does so. He's an intelligent, sensitive, well-informed person, but his constitutional role precludes him from playing a public part in controversial issues of that kind. Okay. I do think also it's wrong to compare Putin with Hitler. Hitler was a man who wanted to take over the entire continent of Europe by violence and to oppress the populations in order to impose the will of Germany as the master race. Putin is an autocratic nationalist. It's true, but to compare him with Hitler, who wanted to wipe out the Jewish race and to subjugate the Slavs as well, 26 million Russians died in the Second World War. It's about the most insulting thing you can say to a Russian, that his leader is comparable with Hitler. We might dislike Putin, but nevertheless, there's nothing we can do about him. He's the president of Russia. We certainly don't have the military means to stop him doing what he wants to do. Ukraine didn't exist as an independent country for hundreds of years, apart from 3 years in the 1920s, until the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Crimea, which is now part of Russia again, was only given to Ukraine by Khrushchev in 1954 by a stroke of a pen. 98% of the people of Crimea voted to rejoin Russia.
Okay. Jack Monroe.
When I heard when I heard the news about what Prince Charles had said about Putin, I did a little hooray inside because I thought, well, a lot of us are thinking it, and you know, he comes out with some clangers, but actually, for once, he'd hit the nail right on the head. And history tells us that if we shy away from standing up to fascism or smooth-talking bully boys with, you know, that come and try to implement their regimes and their policies and their ideas that are nothing more than snake oil merchants selling something that's really quite horrible in the guise of a sharp suit or a decent policy, then actually, before you know it, they're bigger than you can deal with. And what we need to do with people like Putin, who I've come within about 5 inches of in my life and I'm still getting over it, what you need to do with people like Putin is to stand up to them, is to tell them what they are, and is to not be afraid of standing up to them.
Okay. Where did you come within 5 inches of them?
The G8 summit.
All right.
Yeah, long story.
Okay, long story.
He's not invited anymore.
Man in the check shirt there, you.
I think that while this comparison may be true, maybe not true, and people will have different opinions on whether Putin is like Hitler, what has changed is what the rest of the world is. And with now structures like United Nations, European Union, and the technology, there's a lot less chance, I think, of something of Hitler's size and scale happening again. And with regards to Prince Charles, everyone in this room and everyone in the world is entitled to their own opinion. And whether or not it's a private conversation, we should all be allowed to say what we want. And that's his opinion, and everyone will have a differing opinion, so he has just as much of a right as anyone to say it.
I think no, not you. Jeremy Browne. Sorry, there are 6 of us here. I'm sorry, I keep stopping you. Because I know, but I know you like to talk. Yeah, no, I'm stopping you. I'm bringing in Jeremy Browne.
Well, when it comes to admiration of Putin, I'm nearer the Prince Charles end of the scale than I am the Nigel Farage end of the scale. But I do think the Hitler comparisons are overblown. It's likely Hitler would have won the Second World War without millions of Russians dying in the cause of stopping him. So we have to be very careful about bandying around the Hitler comparisons. But Putin's ambitions and his nationalism are a concern. They are a threat in the time that we live. And I completely agree with the last person who spoke about the need for us to make sure that we have an outward-looking, engaged internationalist stance, and that we use the United Nations and the European Union and NATO and other institutions to make sure that we keep world order in Europe and further afield.
Have you spoken already? So I don't know. No, OK, you.
I think Tristram Hunt maybe is a little bit naive, and I think people are a little bit naive about the power of the UN, the EU. Putin just signed a treaty with China to supply gas. I don't think he's too worried about what the West think, actually. And I would compare him more to Stalin than Hitler.
OK. Kirstie Allsopp.
Well, as Russia's economy is comparable to that of Italy, perhaps the comparison should be with Mussolini. And it's very reassuring when you think of the Italian comparison. We all think of Russia as quite a scary thing, and I think, sir, you may be wrong, because I think what Tristram said about the economic sanctions is something that's quite hopeful. Yes, the Gazprom deal has happened with China, but what we don't know about that deal, they haven't released the figures. We don't know whether it's more beneficial to China or to Russia. As far as the Prince Charles question goes, he isn't traditionally allowed to express his opinion. The young man in the check shirt said that everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I don't think in Prince Charles' case he is. I feel very sorry for him in that respect. It must be immensely frustrating. But 99% of the time he gets it wrong. He may have slipped up this time, but I think one other thing, it was very mischievous reporting, which didn't benefit any of us.
Did you say 99% of the time he gets it wrong?
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
They're right.
Oh,
must have been right.
Did I say wrong? Oh, my God. I meant right.
All right. That's the quickest retraction I've ever heard. OK, on which note? On which note, we'll go on to a last question from Deborah Dobrin, please.
In southwest Hertfordshire, 222 children did not get one of their choice of secondary schools. Should you have to send your child to a school that you haven't chosen?
OK, school places, right to the heart of it, not just in southwest Hertfordshire, but in many parts of Britain. Should you have to send your child to a school you didn't choose? Jeremy Browne.
Well, it's easy to say, no, you shouldn't have to send your child to a school you didn't choose. The question then is, how do you try and make sure that the supply of school places in popular schools matches up to the ambitions of parents to send their children to those schools? And I think the problem that we have had is that we have a very static system where schools are maintained which are unpopular and local authorities try and allocate children to unpopular schools. And what we need is a more dynamic system where schools that are very popular can expand, or they can open up new campuses, if you like, new versions of that school, that more providers can come in and they can provide schools as well. And that the good schools, if you like, the popular schools, can flex up to meet parental demand. So I think that the era of a sort of command and control government ministers telling everybody that the government knows best about what your children's education should look like, that era is coming gradually to an end. And what we need to do is to try and insert more choice for parents into the system. And I think that is difficult to do because there's limited finance. It's easier to say in theory than it is in practice, but I think that is the direction we should be going in.
Deborah, what's your view?
Everyone talks about free schools and the opportunities that are available to have the infrastructure that we require. But then we have a free school that was supposed to be built down the road to us, and I would say that everything was put in its way to prevent that school from being built. There is a dire need for the infrastructure to meet the requirements of every locality, and it's not about immigration before we hear that it's all about immigration. It's about we do need to build houses on brownfield land, but there's no point building houses without providing a school and a hospital and all the other infrastructure that is needed.
How do they stop the free school?
Well, you know more than me, but there was planning, there was lots of planning
you know more than she does.
Yeah, I'm actually a member of the secondary free school, which was meant to open in September, and unfortunately it didn't open mainly due to the site issue. And we're actually waiting to hear this month if the site that we've chosen is actually available. It's owned by the Department of Health, and the issue that's holding up at the moment is that they're saying that the land is worth X amount and they're not willing to reduce.
So it'll be sorted, but you're
it's going to be sorted.
In principle, you're in favour of a free school being set up there?
Yes, of course, yes.
Tristram Hunt, are you in favour of a free school being set up?
No? Thank you, Jeremy. I'm in favour of you getting together as parents and community activists and teachers to set up a new school where we need places. And if you need places here, well then, you know, good luck to you. And the government's let you down. I know about this hospital site, and they've botched it up 100%. And it's a scandal what's happened to you as a community.
There's 24% of families in Radlett did not get any of their 4 choices this year, secondary schools, compared to the national average, average of 5%.
Is the free school the answer to this, the thing that she's trying to do? From Labour's point of view, are you in favour of it?
It can be part of an answer, because what we need... Because a free school is not the only school in the world, you know? They're maintained schools. There are voluntary controlled schools, there are academy schools, and free schools can be part of an answer in the right place. And what I'd want you to do when you set up your school is to have qualified teachers in it, to have transparency, to have accountability, to make sure that your admissions code is reflective of the local environment. Look,
how did you describe them?
The first job of a government when it comes to education policy is to have enough places and then to have the teachers to teach in those schools. And on both of those issues, we've got a government which is failing on the job. And we saw last week that they had raided £400 million from the basic needs budget in order to fund some of these free schools where we don't need the places. So where you need the places, the crisis you're facing is as a result of the misallocation of funds by this government, and you should hold them to account on that.
Chris Grayling.
Well, Tristram, you are dancing on the head of a pin over the free schools issue, because one week you say you oppose free schools, the next week you support them. When you're in a place where they want them, you support them.
Let him answer.
He's misrepresented me, David.
Let him answer. You've said your bit. We've heard what she says.
Are in areas of need, and that's a basic point, so that people aren't disappointed.
A dangerous ideological experiment is what you actually said about them. A dangerous ideological experiment.
Yeah, they are vanity projects. They are vanity projects where they're not needed. Where they're needed, they're absolutely
right. Now will you allow Chris Grayling to answer?
So we are in the middle of, leave aside the immigration issue, we're in the middle of a baby boom. And we're seeing in my own constituency big pressures on primary places. They will feed through to secondary places shortly. You've got the secondary places issue here. We're spending about £5 billion at the moment on creating new school places. We are spending money, yes, on new free schools. We believe that a mix of provision, putting money into maintained schools, expanding maintained schools where they need to be maintained, putting money into free schools so new free schools can open, is the right mix. It is a challenge at a time when the number of applicants for places has surged in the way it has in the last few years. We want your free school to open. I know Michael Gove will want your free school to open. And where there are problems with places around the country, we will do our best to fill them up. It is always a challenge. School places, schools admissions, the annual round of applications, I know as a constituency MP over 13 years, is about the most difficult thing that the community deals with. There's never a perfect answer. All that people in government and local authorities can do is to do their best. With the help of parents' groups like yourselves and the free school movements, we can create alternatives that can both meet those short-term needs but also create something that's vibrant and different in our education system and help raise standards.
Deborah's question was, should you have to send your child to a school you don't choose? So we've only got a couple of minutes left. Jack Monroe.
Well, should you have to send your child to a school you didn't choose? I used to live in Southend, and I applied for 4 different school places for my son in Southend-on-Sea, and I got the 3rd school place on my list, which was about 3.5 miles away and would have posed a massive problem for me as a then single parent walking my son to school or getting the bus every morning. I now don't live in Southend. My son has got a school place in our local area, thank God, after a lot of harassing phone calls. But should you have to send your child to a school you didn't choose, well, if the option is that or not send your child to school at all, then I would ask you what your responsibility is as a parent. Would you get that bus 3 miles down the road, or would you send your child to school? It might not be the ideal school that you want to send your kid to, but, you know, I went to the not ideal school that, you know, my parents didn't really want to send me to, and I think I turned out all right. I'm on question time, you know.
Kirstie Allsopp.
Is that the measurement? We've all passed.
I only got 4 GCSEs on question time.
Kirstie Allsopp.
Jack and I are
Very
the
brief.
only people on this panel who didn't go to university. I went to 10 different schools, and I'm on question time.
You went to school apparently.
Neil Hamilton, and very briefly,
Were
if
you
you would.
expelled 9 times?
Never expelled.
Neil, very briefly, if you would.
Well, I'm interested to hear Tristram say that he's in favour of free schools where they're needed, but who is he to decide what the needs are? Surely it's the parents and the children who should come
But it's public
first.
money. It's public money. We can't
not
write a blank
politicians
cheque everywhere
and
around the
bureaucrats.
country.
That's been the fault of the British education system in my lifetime, actually. It is that parents, for too long, have been excluded or virtually excluded from the process. And what Michael Gove is doing at the Department of Education, I think, is a breath of fresh air, and it's part of the answer to the problem.
Okay. The woman there, a very, very quick point.
I sat on the education panel at Hertfordshire County Council for 4 years, and I have great sympathy for the South West Hertfordshire people. But actually, the truth is, in a lot of cases, people have to get their children in school that they didn't choose. But you know what? Those schools are actually really good. We've got one in Hemel Hempstead that was deeply unpopular. It's like trying to turn the Titanic. It's a fantastic school, but people don't want it because historically it wasn't a good school. So, you know, people need to give those schools a bit of slack, really. And
Okay. We've got to stop. So, our hour's up. If you stay with BBC One and come with me in a moment to the election night studio, we'll have the beginning of the results from the local elections. But as for question time, next week we're going to be coming from inside the new Terminal 2 at Heathrow Airport. And Piers Morgan and Joey Barton, the footballer, are going to be on our panel. I don't know who else will get to agree to come, but the week after that we're going to be in Llandudno in North Wales. So Heathrow or Llandudno, it's your choice. Apply to our website, the address is there. My thanks to the panel and to all of you who came to take part in this programme from Radlett. Till I see you again, I hope, in 5 minutes' time. Goodbye.